Rikki Klieman is here now. Do you have these conversations with clients often and saying, Lordy, Lordy, I hope there are tapes? I mean,
well, he is charming and folksy, and he acquitted himself so well. I had said earlier today that this was James Comey's opportunity to rehabilitate his reputation. I know Comey, I know Bob Mueller even better professionally, and when I look at it as a lawyer, because I always come from that perspective, because that's why I'm here. James Comey had an impeccable reputation as being a truth teller, as being someone who did what he said he would do, and all of that got messed up last year.
Yep, in the middle of the summer.
Yes.
So there was this, he came out strong, there was this strength in the beginning, especially when he was talking about his departure and how much it hurt him that he wasn't able to say a proper goodbye, how he found out about the firing on television, and when he talked about the White House lying about the reasons. But there was also this vulnerability when he was asked why he didn't use more direct language with the president when, as Comey alleges, the president asked him to do certain things that he felt inappropriate. And he said multiple times, he said, maybe I wasn't strong.
Maybe I wasn't
strong.
Maybe I was stunned. I was stunned, he repeated. He also invokes the power of the Oval Office. For any of us who have been fortunate enough to even walk through the Oval Office, the immediate feeling of the majesty and power of that room. So to say to the newly coming in president-elect, let alone president, that when the president suggests something to you, that it's not a directive, he was very clear. He thought it was a directive.
Well, legally, Rikki, so Cornyn also asked James Comey about what an FBI agent is required to do if they feel a criminal act has been committed. And at first he wasn't sure. And then he went into a more detailed response. But I thought that moment was interesting, as he was trying to sort all this out in his head.
Because he usually is not looking at it from that position. When you are dealing with the FBI, first of all, you're an agent. Then above you, you have people in a supervisory capacity all the way up to the director. So if you think that there has been some kind of behavior that is at worst criminal and is at best perhaps a little bit unethical or improper or makes you feel queasy, who do you go to? Who do you tell? And where his problem was that he knew that in the very first conversation where he feels that he's being asked to give a loyalty oath, that he's just stunned by this act of asking if, in essence, that he is going to be a patronage employee. So he writes a memo. And that's a safe and smart thing to do, because you want to memorialize a conversation. But do you take it to someone? Well, then, who do you take it to?
Yeah.
But who do you ultimately take it to? You, at that point,
well, he checked off the list.
Yes. But you're dealing at where he is about people saying, well, why didn't he run to the Attorney General? And he wasn't in a position where he could go and run to the Attorney General, and he certainly didn't want to upset his troops. That was very important to him.
To Lindsey Graham's point to us, and that is Bob Mueller never would have let James Comey get up here and testify if he thought there was an obstruction of justice case, because he would never let his star witness speak in front of this committee. Does that make sense to you?
I disagree with it as a thought of Robert Mueller. I understand the logic of Lindsey Graham's statement. However, I really believe that Bob Mueller was not going to say to James Comey, I'm at the very first days or weeks of my investigation, or say to himself, so therefore I'm not going to let you go up there, when you were the director of the FBI, and this is your only opportunity to publicly acquit yourself. This is your only opportunity to publicly tell your side of the story. I don't think that Bob Mueller was being Machiavellian and thinking, oh, James Comey might change his testimony later on, so I have to worry about it.
Interesting point, because there have been a lot of questions about, oh, is Mueller much farther in the investigation than we think, or is he just in the very initial stages?
Initial stages, they're still hiring people. People are coming in droves. They want to work on that investigation.
So if we do hear from James Comey again, which we may,
Yes.
in front of judiciary, what else is he going to be asked, and what else do you want to hear?
Well, I think judiciary will go right to where your question was. Judiciary is really about the nature of process of the FBI. It's not personal to James Comey. It's what should a good FBI agent do? What is the usual course of events when something happens that makes you uncomfortable? Do you write a memo? Do you have a meeting? Do you go to the Attorney General? What are the series of steps? And if there was no protocol, why isn't there one?
Let's reset here for just a moment, if we could. Rikki Klieman is with us following this extraordinary testimony from James Comey. The main and first highlight of which was the fact that James Comey said the White House lied, and that he felt the president was going to lie about their conversations, which is why he kept these notes. Many, many more layers to this still being digested. We're still waiting to hear from the president's attorney himself. The president did not tweet or comment this morning. His son Donald Jr. did, and said that there's no obstruction of justice here. Rikki, from a legal perspective, did James Comey provide the president some cover on the obstruction issue?
I won't call it cover, but he certainly legally helped the president when it comes to the obstruction issue. But we have to remember, the obstruction of justice issue is an arc. It is not just one day or one phone conversation. What you have here are a series of conversations, but ultimately they lead to the firing of James Comey. You can't look at what was said in January as an isolate. But I do think that probably Donald Trump and his lawyer should breathe easier after the testimony in terms of any legal question of obstruction of justice. It was much more difficult about Donald Trump's character than it was about his legal liability for obstruction.
We were talking about this, is that depending on where you approach this or how you feel about the president or James Comey, you can come away with this either way thinking it's a win.
Yes, well, it would be better, I think, if both sides came away thinking it was a win, instead of both sides throwing stones, which is the usual activity that has happened in the polarization of this country. Certainly, President Trump's lawyer is going to come forth any moment now, and I would expect him to say, see, there's no obstruction here. That all that the president said to James Comey was that he hoped that the Flynn investigation would go away. Let it go. It's a hope. But you're in the Oval Office. He's your commander-in-chief.
Right.
He's the chief executive. He took it as a direction.
Well, as is often the case in the president's language and in the release that we got from his attorney last night, is that he was completely and totally vindicated.
Well, look, you don't get vindicated on day one of James Comey's testimony.
Well, I think they said even before the testimony began that he was
right. He was vindicated. They said because of the statement.
Right.
The reality is vindication usually comes after a proceeding is concluded. Whether it's concluded with no possibility of impeachment articles being drawn or criminal responsibility, but there would not be that against a sitting president, or whether in the regular context of criminal cases, which this is not, if you look at it when you're acquitted. It's not on day one of someone's statement.
How effective is the ignorance explanation from either a legal or political perspective?
Look,
we heard this from, so Speaker Ryan said, and he said to the point before, he has said the president's new to Washington, doesn't always get the protocol, may not understand exactly how he's supposed to handle these situations.
Well, as I always say, he's trumping Trump. The reality of the situation is that it is a basic maxim of law. You learn it in your very first year, that ignorance of the law is no excuse. You can't plead ignorance. You can only do what is ethically correct, and you should have enough sense that the FBI director is an independent person. That's why he gets a 10-year term. He is not supposed to be there serving just for one president. He's supposed to overlap. And so to tell him to let something go, it certainly smacks of something that just is not appropriate. Whether or not it's obstruction of justice, that's a whole other question.
That said, FBI directors have been fired before.
Yes, but not often.
Yeah.
Once.
We do have an excerpt now from the president's attorney, Marc Kasowitz. He is going to speak here, and we have that picture up. But we do have this, at least part of the statement now. It says, quote, contrary to numerous false press accounts leading up to today's hearing, Rikki, you're hearing this at the same time as well, Mr. Comey has now finally confirmed publicly what he repeatedly told the president privately. The president was not under investigation as part of any probe into Russian interference. He also admitted that there was no evidence that a single vote changed as a result of any Russian interference. Mr. Comey's testimony also makes clear that the president never sought to impede the investigation into attempted Russian interference in the 2016 election. And in fact, according to Mr. Comey, the president told Mr. Comey it would be good to find out in that investigation if there was some satellite associates of his who did something wrong. He did not exclude anyone from that statement. Consistent with that statement, the president never in form or substance directed or suggested that Mr. Comey stop investigating anyone, including suggesting that Mr. Comey let Flynn go. As he publicly stated the next day, he did say to Mr. Comey, General Flynn is a good guy. He has been through a lot, and also asked how General Flynn is doing. Admiral Rogers testified, we heard this yesterday, that the president never directed him to do anything illegal, immoral, unethical, or inappropriate. Rogers did say, as far as I can remember, we should add that context to yesterday's testimony. Director Coates said the same thing. The president likewise never pressured Mr. Comey. So the president is pointing now to these satellites, some of whom certainly have reputations. But I mean, he backed off on this a little bit about a month ago when he said, listen, as far as I know, I've had no involvement. So he is...
He's distancing himself.
There's some deflection taking place here, for sure.
And I do want to go back to something in this very wisely written statement on the part of the lawyer, which I would expect nothing less from Mr. Kasowitz. He's really has a terrific reputation. But I do think that we have to look at what Mr. Comey said about the conversation about Flynn. Here, he says, according to Mr. Comey, the president told Mr. Comey it would be good to find out in the investigation if there were some satellites associates, and if something went wrong, right, so be it. So Mr. President, I did not do anything wrong, but if my satellites, or in other words, associates did, well, that's just the way it is. But when you get to Flynn, he says that it's not a question that he said, let him go. It's a question that he said, General Flynn, as is a good guy, he's been through a lot. Mr. Comey is very clear today that President Trump told him to let it go.
Legally speaking, what does that matter? If he's
well,
a good
it may
guy,
or may not matter. I've been through a lot. The guy's been through a lot is nothing. I mean, it's nothing. And if that's all he said, he's a good guy and he's really been through a lot, well, that would be then just fine. And that would not even cause a question about obstruction of justice.
We should mention Robert Mueller has just released a statement, or basically said he has no comment.
Which I would expect him to say.
Special counsel now looking into the Russian investigation. Listen, James Comey was glowing in his praise of Bob Mueller.
And rightfully so. Bob Mueller is, I say without fear of any contradiction, one of the finest public servants that this country has been fortunate enough to have. I've known Bob Mueller for many, many years. I respect him as much as I could ever respect anyone in the arena of law enforcement. He is a person of total integrity, and he will follow the facts wherever it takes him, including the fact if it takes him to nowhere, and he will admit that it went to nowhere.
But given how measured these men typically are, and whether you're talking about Robert Mueller or James Comey, we keep going back to the beginning of this hearing, and the language that James Comey used, speaking about the White House and speaking about the president, lying, liars,
Yes, he started that way.
Yeah.
I mean, he began, and it made you
kept
sit
on
up
about
straight.
that way. Yeah.
Well, you have to also understand James Comey is looking at a couple of things here. Number one, he has to rehabilitate his own reputation. Number two, he's very concerned about the reputation of the FBI. He had a reason why he went and made those memos about the conversations that he had with Donald Trump. He didn't do that with George W. Bush. He didn't do that with Barack Obama. Why? Because he felt he didn't have to. Here, he was afraid, then this is according to him, that Donald Trump would lie about their conversations, which is why he does say, Lordy, I hope there are tapes.
But again, to Comey's complications then, optically or legally, it's this selective application, though, of memorializing these conversations. And we mentioned, he mentioned the conversation, one of the conversations with President Obama lasted for an hour.
Yes, but
and none of that was written down.
But what he's memorializing is something that he thinks might cause him a problem or the Bureau a problem in the future. It would be the same thing, Jeff, if as a lawyer, if I'm doing a criminal case and the prosecution offers a plea of guilty to 5 years for my client, and I convey that to my client, I always memorialize those conversations, because what if my client comes back one day and says, she never told me that? What if the prosecutor comes back one day and says, I never made that offer? Now, someone could say that perhaps my notes were in error, but I think that we do these things to protect ourselves. And by the way, in policing, in agents for the Bureau, this is a common practice. If something is making you uncomfortable, you write a memo to the file.
So that led to the conversations with, and he ticked off the list of those who he discussed some of these conversations with, including the deputy director and others. But then that is not then spread to a wider audience, because he says he's concerned about its potential effect on the investigation.
Yes. What he wants to do, according to his testimony today, is he wants to avoid, or wanted to avoid, a quote-unquote chilling effect upon the agency. What he did not want was for the agents to lose their feeling of being assertive and aggressive in a very appropriate way in terms of an investigation by feeling that the president was asking them to hold back. So he did not want to curtail the agents, and he certainly did not want the agents to feel that there was, to use the words of this morning, a cloud hanging over their own investigation. He wanted the investigation to go forward ethically, properly, and aggressively.
As it does today, under different circumstances.
Correct.